My name's Melanie Burnett. Welcome to you all. I'm the Interim Executive Vice President for University Life and the Senior Vice President for Columbia Health. It's my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight for Awakening Our Democracy, AI in the Ballot Box. A special thank you to our co-sponsors, the Data Science Institute, the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, and Columbia Journalism School for making this event possible tonight. Our Awakening Our Democracy series seeks to delve into timely topics by convening experts who can help us unpack contemporary issues that are dominating the headlines. This evening, we will dig into artificial intelligence and the election process broadly, while specifically focusing on how AI has the potential to impact this year's presidential election. To guide us through this complex discussion, we are fortunate to have a wonderful group of scholars joining us for this moderated discussion, which will be followed by Q&A. So I'd like to introduce our panelists and moderator. Our moderator is Dhrumil Mehta, Associate Professor of Data Journalism at the Columbia Journalism School. Wow. Popular here. I hadn't even finished. Also Deputy Director of the Tao Center for Digital Journalism and a member of the Data Science Institute. Professor Mehta previously worked as a database journalist at 538, where he built and maintained the database of public opinion polls, its open data repositories, and other core infrastructure. And in addition to making scrapers, bots, databases, and interactive graphics, he also reported and wrote on elections, public opinion, and media. Professor Mehta is also a visiting associate professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, where he teaches a course that he developed called Programming and Data for Policymakers, which is designed to equip policy students with the skills needed to navigate nuanced issues at the intersection of technology and governance through a combination of hands-on programming workshops and policy discussions. Our esteemed panelists include Brian Smith. Brian's Assistant Professor of Computer Science at Columbia Engineering, Director of the Computer-Enabled Abilities Lab, and an affiliate of the Data Science Institute. His research goal is to reimagine how digital platforms should be designed so they solve human problems and help people live their best lives. He views technology design through a holistic lens, incorporating fundamental insights from engineering, social sciences, design, and games. His recent research includes work in accessibility, social computing, augmented reality, and smart city infrastructure. He's been named a National Academy of Sciences Kavli Fellow and is a recipient of the NSF Career Award, Columbia Engineering's Distinguished Faculty Teaching Award, and Columbia Engineering's Jeanette and Armin Avanesian's Diversity Award. Alma Steingart, an assistant professor in the Department of History at Columbia, researches the interplay between American politics and mathematical rationalities. Professor Steingart's current project, Accountable Democracy, examines how mathematical thought and computing technologies have impacted electoral politics in the United States in the 20th century. It follows on her first book, oh gosh, I'm embarrassing myself now, Axiomatics. I could just use my English as an excuse there. Axiomatics, Mathematical Thought and High Modernism. Professor Steingart's work has appeared in Social Studies of Science, Grey Room, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Her work is supported by a career award from the National Science Foundation. Yamil Velez is an assistant professor of political science, specializing in political psychology with a focus on attitude and belief change. His research explores how the quality of political information shapes engagement and representation, with a particular emphasis on the impact of misinformation within immigrant communities. His latest work investigates the potential of generative artificial intelligence to enhance our understanding of public opinion through adaptive, tailored surveys. Professor Velez's research has been published in leading journals, including American Political Science Review, American Journal of Political Science, Journal of Politics, British Journal of Political Science, and Political Analysis. And Eugene, an associate professor of computer science at Columbia Engineering and co-chair of the Data, Media, and Society Center for Columbia's Data Science Institute. Professor Wu is broadly interested in technologies that help users play with their data. His goal is for users at all technical levels to effectively and quickly make sense of their information. He's interested in solutions that ultimately improve the interface between users and data, and uses techniques borrowed from fields such as data management, systems, crowdsourcing, visualization, and HCI. Before we begin tonight's discussion, I'd like to introduce Chris Wiggins, Associate Professor of Applied Mathematics and Systems Biology and Executive Committee Member for the Data Science Institute, who will share a bit more context about tonight's discussion. Thanks so much.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Chris Wiggins. I'm happy to welcome all of you on behalf of the Data Science Institute, and also thank you for spending part of your evening with us tonight to engage with these issues. As mentioned earlier, I serve on the Executive Committee of the Data Science Institute. I've been serving on the Executive Committee since it was founded in 2012. And since that time, the Data Science Institute has been working to advance Columbia's core strength in data science, as well as to bring that transformative power to various fields, including medicines, social science, business, and more. The Data Science Institute, or DSI, has representatives from all the different schools of Columbia University and the faculty. Now, tonight's panel is going to exemplify DSI's multidisciplinary mission with participants representing diverse fields. We believe at the DSI that all the fields can benefit from the tool set and mindset of data science and AI. And addressing issues like election integrity is going to take insights and partnerships from across all of the disciplines at Columbia. We're lucky to be at a university with so many great multidisciplinary strengths. And this panel is a great example of how Data Science Institute fosters those collaborations. Actually, I myself am the beneficiary of data science's attempts to foster multidisciplinary collaboration. I was the beneficiary of an award from DSI in 2016 to create a class with a history professor on the history and ethics of data, which I should say I was not on the committee that decided whether or not I should get that award, which led to a book with a history professor, as well as another book with Jeanette Wing, who was at the time the director of the Data Science Institute. So I would like to thank Data Science Institute in addition to thanking you. So Columbia AI, you should know, Columbia AI is a university-wide initiative to involve the entire university in the future of responsible and ethical AI, leveraging the great talents across the university to benefit society. So please, in addition to wanting to spend this time to thank you tonight, I want to use this time to encourage you to check out ai.columbia.edu, brand new website, fresh ones and zeros delivered to you. Now, back to tonight. Tonight's conversation reflects DSI's long-standing commitment to bridging disciplines and tackling the big questions about AI, including transparency, equity, and governance, all of which are going to have big impact on our democratic institutions, and therefore makes it essential to draw in the expertise from various fields, as you have heard introduced. So I encourage all of you tonight to actively engage, to ask questions tonight, and afterwards I encourage you to check out all of the other events at ai.columbia.edu and of course datascience.columbia.edu to stay involved and engaged. DSI is here to be a partner to the entire university, and so we encourage you to stay engaged. And with that, I look forward to tonight's discussion, and I believe now I will be turning it over to Dhrumil Mehta. Thank you very much, Dhrumil.
Thank you. Right, thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm excited to have such an interdisciplinary panel here to discuss today. So to start out, like good academics, let's define our terms. So what are we talking about when we talk about AI today? I know some of these tools have been around for a really long time, some things are pretty new. So what are we talking about when we talk about AI today, and what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've noticed that you think the general public has around AI and AI tools? I'll start with whoever is ready, but this is one I'd like everyone to take a crack at.
So I think naturally, because of the advances in NLP, like generative AI, I think a lot of people are now kind of trying to set the boundaries such that we're talking about next token prediction and in some cases, I guess, image models. But I think the impact of AI stretches far past just generative technologies. There are multi-arm banded optimization algorithms. There are, I think, more classic NLP approaches, like bag of words, that I think are still used in political settings. And so I think although as we're confronting the election, naturally the conversation is trending in the direction of thinking about LLMs and image models, I think we should also consider ways in which predictive algorithms are used and have been used in politics for the past decade or so.
And are there any big misconceptions that you think the general public has around these tools as well?
I think there is a lot of concern that these are super persuasive technologies that are able to produce significant attitude and belief change. So far, the evidence is very limited on that front. The reason why is not necessarily because of deficiencies with generative AI, but rather because persuasion is incredibly difficult. So David Brockman at UC Berkeley and Josh Halla at Yale have done a lot of work basically assessing how well campaigns do in terms of persuading voters, getting them to vote for the intended candidate. And generally what they find are null effects on persuasive efforts. So looking at hundreds of campaign ads, in another project looking at I believe over 20 campaigns actually used randomized control trials to see whether they could move the needle. The effects were incredibly small. And so for me, I think a misconception is a lot of people are assuming that these technologies can get someone from supporting one candidate and push them in the direction of another candidate. But I think given what we know about persuasion, that's a big challenge for these technologies.
Great, and with that we can all go home now. So Professor Smith, can you tell us a bit more about what is AI and what misconceptions are you seeing around it?
Okay, so yeah, happy to share. The way that I think about AI, right? AI stands for artificial intelligence, and at a high level, it's really just about how smart can computers be? How much can they understand about the world? What is the level of understanding that a computer currently has? And these days, right, with the AI explosion, we are now in an era of generative AI, which is how well can computers generate new content. I think a common misconception is that when we use tools such as ChatGPT to generate text or to generate images, a common misconception is that the computer actually understands what it's generating. Whereas I like to think of AI as just pattern completion. It understands only the data, the text and the images that it's scraped from the internet. And when you ask it to generate new things, it cobbles existing examples together in a way that is most reasonable, and that's what it outputs. These computers, these AI systems do not have original thought. They're really just generating and replicating patterns that they've already seen. So there is no new understanding that computers have per se. That's not to say that we're not in a dangerous place with these LLMs, with these generative tools. Basically, whoever's wielding those tools can actually create content that is convincing. And so I think these like AI systems are as dangerous as the people generating content that they would like to generate for their purposes. That's the game, right? So this is a human problem at heart. If you think about it as if people had the ability to create some kind of social media post or some kind of image on social media or some kind of video on social media that they would like to create that might somehow convince people that one political side or the other actually shares the same values as that person, what kinds of things might they start to create? And I am a little embarrassed to admit that I myself have fallen for some of these AI-generated social media posts. At least to my defense, they were harmless. One of them was showing like some picture of large ships floating on water, and they said, "Oh, it's this special sea or aquatic version of a mirage that you might see in the desert that actually makes boats appear as if they're floating," right? These things, I think when written from the perspective of just everyday content that you might encounter on social media, just by, regular folks, they can be convincing if you're not on your guard. And so the danger of AI is really the danger of people understanding what actually leads people to buy into social media content or content that you might find on Reddit and oh yeah, this is written by regular people, and then okay, I trust it. It seems like regular folks actually talking about this stuff, but it's actually not, because it's replicating the patterns of regular folks talking about things. That's the real danger of AI, I think. At least that's how I see it.
Thank you. So it's there's an interesting tension which we may come back to between whether it's persuasive or not, because it seems like there's kind of evidence that it may not be as well. So let's move on to Professor Steingart. Can you tell us what is AI and what are common misconceptions you see around it?
Sure. I'm not going to define AI as a computer scientist. I think we have computer scientists here that can do better than me. What I'll do, and I'll try to do throughout today, is just to point what can history bring, how can history help, and specifically the history of technology. So the first thing to note is that AI, artificial intelligence, the way what is studied today, is not at all the way the pioneers in the field understood it. When artificial intelligence as a field emerged in the 1950s, it really was to mimic human intelligence, and the pinnacle, the best example of that all of the attention, all the kind of research attention went to, is playing chess. Because the idea is that being able to play chess really shows true intelligence. What today, the large language models that are being used today, that are much more work through kind of statistical correlation, they were not at all what the original pioneers of artificial intelligence had in mind when they kind of started developing the field. The reason I'm bringing it up, because it's useful to us to remember that intelligence itself, and there are a lot of work by historians of science to show that intelligence itself is a moving target. What we count as intelligence, what is intelligence at a given moment, is changed. And in fact, it's changed in relation to the technologies that are getting developed. So what we think about as artificial intelligence today might not necessarily be what is artificial intelligence in a few years from now, and definitely not what it used to be a few years before. I want to take a quick take on this question of what I think are some of the misconceptions. So I was going to say the same point that you said, Brian, about this kind of thinking about the artificial intelligence themselves as understanding. There's no real understanding. But I'll make another point here. That's something that I always make sure to get across to students. I don't know if I'm successful or not, but I try. Is to fight against what we term as technological determinism. Namely, the idea that once we have this technology, certain things are inevitable, right? We turn to talk about technology, we turn to talk about AI as AI doing things, as artificial intelligence bring certain futures to fruition. This is just wrong. There's a lot of work by historians of technology and technologists that shows that this view is often is incorrect. And what it does, it's obscure the fact that behind these machines, behind these technologies, there are people with specific kind of incentives. This artificial intelligence, this large language LLMs, they require a lot of computational capacity. That means that there needs to be a lot of resources that's been directed to that. That means that people have to put a lot of money into it. And when we start thinking not about artificial intelligence as operating, but remind ourselves that these machines are working within a specific social context, I think it would be really useful. So the kind of conversation and the kind of approaches that we might think about of how we want to see these technologies in society.
Thank you. Professor Wu, what is AI and what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've seen around it?
There's not much to add to that. I was actually curious to what you said about persuasion, because you talk in the context of political campaigns. And I wonder, I imagine political campaigns are restricted on what types of persuasive techniques they're allowed to use. So what about general persuasion outside of political campaigns and those types of efforts? Like, do they see null effects as well?
So I can't speak to the marketing literature, but I will say that one of the challenges with persuasion, especially in political settings, is that it's usually not one-sided, right? And so often you have competing messengers, and so one possibility as a result of that strategic interactions, you get null persuasive effects on net. But I certainly leave it open to whether these tools can get you to buy new products or.
I see. So even if it's like state actors and so on, because there's state actors on both sides, the effects are null. Okay.
Yeah, and I suppose also cool. because we see null effects today doesn't mean we will always see null effects, right? because we have such an interdisciplinary panel here, I'm kind of curious to probe about what each of our roles are and the kinds of students that we interact with. There will be students in the audience who are going to be building AI tools, students who are going to be using them, consuming AI content, making AI content, or regulating AI. And when I say regulating, I don't mean just legislation, but also you may work at a company that either has rules that you have to abide by, or you have to define the rules because they don't have any yet. And so thinking about the various things that students might do and what you're doing in your discipline already, what is the role of your discipline, or more broadly, disciplines adjacent to yours in tackling some of the pressing issues around AI? And I suppose we can start with Eugene. Work our way around.
I guess I was actually just thinking of other things, but
okay, we can start with someone else.
Yeah, I can. I guess the thing I think about is, when we talk about like misinformation and generating fake data and so on, it's not like the nature of the problem has never existed, right? Like, persuasion and during like World War, I, World War II, kind of like snake oil, selling snake oil, like mismarketing and all these sort of things have always existed, right? And always will exist. And so fundamentally, like, AI doesn't change anything in terms of like the nature of that. But I think what it does change, and it's fundamental to technology, is that it changes the timescales relative to people, right? In society. And so, like AI especially, and kind of like technology allows you to accelerate kind of like the production of widgets, the production of cars, and I guess now the production of information, whether or not it's like good or bad. And I think it's the fact that like that can evolve at a much faster rate than kind of like people can evolve defenses for. And so, like a political campaign may find that a particular technology is very useful, and that edge over the course of like a year might actually have a tremendous effect because society or people have not learned to adapt to it. So I would imagine if like what we have today stays fixed, then over 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, society will figure out ways to cope with kind of like, these generative models and what we have today. But I think the fear is the fact that like the rate of change is continuing to increase. And so it's not really clear how to deal with that relative to how quickly people evolve.
And I'll move to then Professor Smith. Also, as a computer scientist, you may work with students who are building these kinds of tools. What is the role of somebody who's building these kinds of tools? What should they be thinking about as they go about doing so?
Yeah, so my field within computer science is called human-computer interaction, or HCI. And I don't really like the name because the field is really just about how should computers be designed? What purposes should they serve? How should they present themselves to users, to people? How should they manifest in people's everyday lives? It's really about computer design. And I think that I really resonated with Alma's point earlier that it's not the tools themselves that are the bad actors, it's people. We didn't have car crashes in society. We had 0 car crashes until the invention of the automobile. And then car crashes happen because of the people involved and not necessarily the car. I think that's important. Even here in New York City, as crazy as the traffic can get, there were no traffic lights anywhere in New York City. You didn't need them when people were walking around or using a horse or whatever. You didn't need traffic lights in major cities. You can go back to historical photos of New York, of San Francisco, no traffic lights. Now all of a sudden you have a tool that can whisk people much faster, that can create a lot of danger in a relatively short time if they're not under control by people. And so then we have to think of a system of, okay, so what guardrails do we put in place? How do we format the operation of this new tool, the automobile, lanes, stoplights, things like that? We have to create that extra harness and guardrails around the new technology. I think within computer science, when we think about how should computers be designed, like we have the skill set in computer science to actually to make those guardrails or harnesses happen once we know how they should be designed. We can make that happen. So I think anyone in computer science, or even sort of tangential, we should be thinking, like any new student, we should be thinking about what guardrails do we need in place? How do people behave? Understanding human behavior so that the guardrails that we're placing actually aligns with how people intuitively act. They don't have to dramatically learn something new for the guardrails to be effective. How do you make failure cases safe? How do you make the safe option the default? And then let's actually start to implement those systems, the traffic signaling, et cetera, to actually make those guardrails happen.
And I love the interdisciplinary underpinnings of what you just said, because that may involve, for a computer science student, for example, collaborating with psychology or thinking about the cognitive science research or the ways that all of these other fields sort of interact with the kinds of tools they're building. I'm going to move to Professor Steingart next. Not all of us are coding, and not all of us are building these tools. At the journalism school, we're very concerned with how do we accurately convey the implications of AI to a lay audience, particularly in the context of a very important election. What is the role of, I suppose, historians specifically, but also students who are in the arts and humanities and social sciences? How can they be thinking about interacting with AI if they're not personally building some of the tools?
So I would say that I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to answer it a little bit it's a little bit
Sure.
with a twist, which is I would think that it's the students, the computer science students, the engineering student that should take history courses. So I'm going to plug the history department here.
Yes.
I'm allowed to do that. Because I think there's a lot to learn. Artificial intelligence is not the first technology that created fears at the public, either fears about surveillance or fears about elections or fears about interference, foreign interference. I have a class that I often start, and I just give students, I just put on the slides quotes, and I don't tell them in what's the quote in relation to which technology. And they can't tell you if it's on the telegraph, or this is a reaction to the radio, or if this was a reaction to the telephone. And you wouldn't know if I don't identify the technology. You would think that that quote came from contemporary reaction to artificial intelligence. And I think there's something to learn from that history. It's not to say that nothing is new, everything happened, but I think that the history of how states and different actors have dealt with new technologies can really be helpful. So I actually encourage all computer science students. I love it when I have computer science students in my courses. I think I would encourage all computer science to take kind of history or history of technology courses. It would be quite helpful. And it's also, the key is to remember, and I think the key is to remember what we like to think about the system that you are going to design as what we think about as socio-technical systems. In other words, these are not just technical, you're not just creating technical tools. You should always think about them as embedded in the social systems that they are. And I think that a course actually outside of computer science, in the social sciences, even in the humanities, would be really helpful. So that would be my plug for the designers of the technology.
I would also plug, Chris Wiggins has a really good
Exactly.
book, right? How data
course.
happened, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it goes through the history
Exactly.
of where data really came from and how it was used. And it was not ads, right? It was pretty grotesque kind of like uses. And so it's very helpful to have that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Wiggins' class, Data Past, Present, Future, would be the perfect class for any students that is interested in thinking about the systems in a little bit more of kind of a broader perspective.
And I think one of the things that's sort of really exciting about this moment is there is a lot of interesting intellectual work to be done, and it doesn't have to be done by professors. Students can do it sort of in their courses as well. Professor Steingart, for those who are not computer scientists, what role do they have to play? History students, English students, students in the social sciences? So I'll keep going with you, and then I'll come to
what role can they play?
Yeah,
I think that in the sense of again, I would say I will say a few things. I think that historians have a lot of role to play in this. I think that it's not just students of history, but I think it's on all of us to actually play with this system and understand how to have the experience of understanding, get a better sense of understanding how the system works by actually trying to engage with engaging with the system, and actually be it and try. We're in a university. We're in the greatest place where there are people around us that we can talk to and learn more about it.
I would also argue that question is a kind of a false dichotomy. Because the trend in technology has been accessibility of programming, right? Today, like if you use one of these like large language model services, they'll build an application for you.
That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
and so in some sense, like you don't need to have taken like computer science classes to be able to build applications that are useful today, or to analyze like documents and so on. And that trend is going to, of course, just continue. But I think like understanding computation and know how to use it appropriately is probably useful, but it's like becoming more and more accessible. So I would say people shouldn't think of themselves as like non-computer science versus computer science.
Yeah.
Right. Especially like today.
Yeah, I know in the journalism school, a lot of journalists are using it to build all kinds of tools to promote civic society. So I'll turn to Professor Velez. You have some experience practically applying these tools in the political context, and I assume a lot of students will be working on political campaigns, working in industry, working doing academic work that's sort of at the intersection of politics and technology. So what advice do you have for them? What should they be thinking about in terms of utilizing some of these tools in those contexts?
So I would say there are two major benefits of these technologies that I've found in my own work that I think can also apply more broadly to politics. The first is the tailoring aspect, right? To be able to create content that speaks to people of different backgrounds, I think is really powerful. This is actually something that I've been developing over the past couple of years in my research, where I'm actually bringing participants into the research process. So a lot of public opinion polls often have to select, let's say, a number of issues that they want to test and get a read on. So you might have the classic issues like abortion, the environment, immigration. And what I've done is actually use these tools so that when respondents in open-ended text tell me what they care about, it's actually integrated into the surveys over time. So this creates dynamic surveys that respond to the user and gets us a better sense of what public opinion might be in a given point in time. And so there might be issues, for instance, universal healthcare. One of the most recent iterations of this survey, I didn't include universal healthcare, but it ended up being an issue that a lot of participants mentioned. And so I think like bringing participants directly into the research process, whether it's through an adaptive survey or directly through these chat technologies where you can actually have something that mirrors a semi-structured interview, is really powerful. I would say the second strength of these technologies that's worth exploring is, and in some ways this is related to some of the discussions we've had about human-computer interactions, is you might be able to get people to open up about some tough issues or tough topics. You might be able to have people engage in political discussions or debates that they would not be able to have with family members or friends. And I think there's some power in potentially using these technologies to improve political deliberation, having people reason through their positions, having people confront counter arguments to things that they might care about deeply. And I've used some of this in my own work as well, suggesting that you can actually introduce kind of more attitudinal uncertainty when people engage with these tools, because they're kind of reasoning through what the implications of a counter argument might be. So I would say those two aspects I think are really promising in terms of thinking about politics, right? And so, yeah, there are many others, but those are the ones that I've been thinking a lot about.
That's fascinating. I think this strikes me as a kind of Spider-Man moment, right? Like with great power comes great responsibility. And I'll continue with you, and then kind of we'll come back down this way. I'm curious, what are, if you are doing things like being able to help people approach tough topics, this is a very personal sort of thing, what are some of the guardrails that you think about when you're using AI for political research specifically? And then I'll kind of pass it down to everyone else as well.
The first is explicitly incorporating moderation controls, making sure that there's no toxic content that's produced by these models. I think that's incredibly important. The other is, so in the work I've used, where I've used AI, my sense is I'm not trying to necessarily push for a particular position. So these are not, for instance, studies of how to figure out or figuring out how to make people more Republican or Democrat. It's more of like, how are people confronting, let's say, counter arguments that target issue positions they care about. So the direction isn't fixed in advance. I do think that we might run into ethical issues if we have a bunch of studies kind of trying to test the persuasive effectiveness of AI interactions that motivate people to be a certain kind of political type, right? I do worry about that. But I would say that for me, toxicity is one thing, and also thinking about what kinds of are you directing people toward a certain goal? And I think as an academic, I don't want to. I'm not in the space of like political advocacy, right?
Right.
So.
It's interesting that you're relying on some of the ethical norms of your profession that were already there, and I imagine even outside of academia, whichever profession students are in, they'll have some ethical norms that they can rely on, but there might be some adapting that to these new situations. So I'll continue down the line with this question. What are some guardrails? You mentioned traffic lights earlier. What are some of the traffic lights we should think about when we're building these systems, especially as they interact with politics and civic society?
Maybe this is just me as a computer science punting it over to other people, but I think law and policy I think we need laws and we need policies, right? We have speed limits, we have red light laws, we have a lot of policies around how do you safely operate a car, an automobile, and we don't have these kinds of policies for AI. One could imagine a technological approach where somehow these AI models somehow filter their own outputs and they'll only output reasonable things and nothing too nefarious. But in that case, anyone with tech skills could just create an alternative AI model, alternative social network, alternative whatever, to just bring us to the same problem. I think it's important for enough people to be aware of this issue of like, hey, now it's like super easy for anyone to generate content like text and images and video that they would like to generate for whatever purpose. That's a thing. Now what do we do about it? And I think we're going to as this issue spreads more and more people realize that, like, similar to me with the floating ships, that was a harmless one, but like, oh wow, like this is, it's very easy to get duped here. That doesn't feel good to me. And more people are in that situation. I think we're going to see more acceptance around having public policy that specifically forbids, intentionally nefarious actions.
Yeah, Professor Steingart, I'm curious about your perspective on guardrails, and especially in a period when a new technology has just emerged and we don't have our traffic lights just yet, but the car is here. In a historical context as well, what are your thoughts around the guardrails that we should be thinking about and how to navigate this situation where we don't have those legal and policy remedies just yet?
So, I think that as Brian was saying, I think that there are already attempts. We do already have attempts. Certain states have already passed regulation. California just passed a law that will mean that you have to flag. You have to, if you're using AI fake, you have to actually make sure that it's clear if you're using it for political advertisement, or that this one will not. Another part of the law that they passed that will not get into effect, I think, until January, though, so it won't be relevant for this election, is that the companies themselves. If you flag a content, the company will have a certain number of hours, 72 hours, I don't remember exactly, to take down the content. If not, there will be certain. So we do have. I want to say that we already do have. But I will say we already have some kind of attempts to try and regulate, at least not on the federal level, but there are a few states that have already tried to introduce a certain kind of way, especially around election. The other area is pornography is the other area, and specifically around child pornography. There's a lot of already regulation out there. The one thing I do want to say is that if we kind of take where history can be helpful, when scientific polling emerged in the 1930s, there were a lot of public conversation around polling, and should we have polling both in the public, but also there are hearings in Congress, what kind of guardrails should be around polling in election. And there was a big, in the 1948, there was a big failure of the pollings. That's very famous. I won't get it because we don't have a lot of time. I won't get into this story. But after this big failure, there was this committee of mostly statisticians that came together to study what happened. Why did the polls fail? What happened after the 2016 is very similar. The committee came together, and what did they say? Eventually say, oh, polling, it's so bad, we don't need to worry about regulating. We should first figure out how, when pollsters do their job better, when they actually can figure out how to do it, and then we should regulate it. And if there's something that the history of this kind of past, since 48 to today have taught us, is that we don't need to wait for the technology of polling, right, to be good, to have real impact, a real effect on the politics. So what we say, we shouldn't wait until the AI technology shows us that it can really dupe all of us around politics, and that using fakes for voice or using AI fakes for campaigns, we don't need to wait until we have really, really bad cases to regulate. I think there needs to be a much more, that's the one thing I would say historically, that states and I think both the government should start thinking about regulation yesterday.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, very urgent. Professor Wu, what are some of the guardrails that you're thinking about when building these tools?
I guess when you say building the tools, I think about like a really big company in AI, in the AI landscape, is this company Scale AI. And what they do is, they are the outsourcing company that all of the big tech players use to basically provide training data. And what is training data? Basically, they give, and what does Scale AI do? Well, Scale AI basically farms out to thousands and thousands of people in the US and around the world to basically look at images, look at text, and look at whatever, and kind of label it, right? And say, is it good, is it bad, is it blah, 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 extracting objects and so on. And so a lot of the work in AI is basically data work. If you look at kind of like the recent Llama 3, kind of like the newest large language model from Meta, and you read the paper, right, the model they've been using is the same one as from like 2 versions ago. But the main thing that's changed is the data sources. And one thing they realize is actually they need to do a lot of data curation to find good data sources. And I think in general, kind of, as the cost of generating content trends towards zero, there'll be more and more kind of like reliance from end users like ourselves on trusted sources, right? Just the same way that kind of like Meta relied on trusted sources to provide kind of like trusted training data. And so there'll be more and more kind of like value. It's the same way how like Google kind of like the reason why it's so valuable is because the internet is a very difficult place to navigate, right? And it's a difficult place to recommend kind of like good sources. And so we rely on Google and search engines for doing that. And so I think, I don't know what guardrails there will be, but certainly kind of like branding and trusted recommendations and kind of like trusted sources and quality control is going to be like a very, very important component.
Well, it's something we love to hear over at the journalism school. So I think we're just about ready to wrap up. I'll give everyone a chance for just a final thought, a parting thought for students who are sort of going to be navigating both this election cycle, but I think well after it, the sort of new civic society where we have these tools kind of much more ubiquitous. What parting advice would you have? And we'll start at that end of the table and come back.
So I'm glad we started this session with the AI literacy video because I think the first step to understanding how powerful these tools might be is to actually interact with them directly and to learn about them. And so I think actually spending a week and interacting with ChatGPT can be really helpful to get a sense of what the limitations are, and also allowing it to flag for yourself, like if you encounter something online, whether it's AI generated or not, it's really helpful to know the kind of style that we often see coming out of these tools. I would say that my sense is that these tools are also going to be helpful, if not already are helpful, I think, in terms of, if we're getting into really difficult topics like politics, especially questions of where parties might stand on different issues, I think that there's going to be a role to play for civic education, merging with these tools and having chatbots that provide people with information about political parties. I've done some work with Don Green here at Columbia and Semmer Sevi at University of Toronto that leverages these tools to basically provide information that's drawn from party platforms. And I think that's something we're going to see more of, and so there are some positive use cases that are worth describing, even in the context of, I think, the more nefarious cases that we discussed.
Great, thank you. Professor Smith.
Yeah, I also really liked how the video framed the issue of this, AI in the ballot box issue as protecting your vote. I think that's really important, right? We're human. Our behavior is shaped by how our brains work. And so when we see content that is intuitive and that we resonate with, that shapes our views, that shapes our behavior. That's just part of being human. But if your behavior is shaped by other people knowing how your brain works and how you want, and how you see like what other people value, I guess, then your vote loses authenticity. And so I concur with the notion of like try out AI for yourself. Everyone here in this room is super smart. And I think, so this reminds me of an exercise that I actually had to go through as part of training when I was working at a tech company. In this case, it was Snapchat, where we were learning about security and email phishing. And so they actually had us meet the person who we were sitting next to, and then we got a little bit of time to dig them up on the internet, and then we had to craft a phishing email to that person. And so I got my partner real good. And she was really shocked, and she said, "Oh wow, I really would have fallen for this if this email just came randomly, because I dug up like her former boss and blah blah blah, and I was able to find this information." Imagine writing a program that could do the same thing. And so when you're actually playing with ChatGPT and these AI tools, I would encourage you to try to scam someone. Try to generate, right? Try to be a bad actor. Like, try it out. See what that is like. You're going to learn a lot about the capabilities of these tools from doing that, and that's going to give you a lot of ideas of like, oh wow, this doesn't feel really good. Here's a possible guardrail that we should be thinking of.
All right, Professor Steingart.
Because you both started with the video, I just want to say something about the video itself, which is the video gave us an example that is a positive potential of AI is using chatbots for getting information about elections. So there was a study that was done by the AI Democracy Project by Julia Angwin and Alondra Nelson, and they did that study.
Actually, over at the journalism school.
Yes,
we did it in our building.
Exactly,
yes.
and they did a study, and they brought election experts to try, and they try all these engines, ask questions about elections. For example, in Texas, can you wear, one of the examples they give, can you wear a MAGA hat? And the answer, the AI told, the chatbot said yes. The answer is no, because you're not allowed to wear, in Texas, there's a law that says that you're not allowed to wear, for example, campaign attire to the polling place. I actually will say, don't follow everything that the video said, because if that what that study did is show exactly that some of these companies have not corrected it. So yesterday I went and tried it because I was so interested in this. And now when you go, at least I tried a few of them, they will send you, if you ask any kind of question about the election, I tried 10 different ones. And that goes back to the question of actually trying, right, which I actually absolutely agree. They immediately will direct you to one of the organization, I don't remember the, Can I Vote, I think, .org, one of the kind of reputable organizations. So it says, if you try it in ChatGPT will say, I cannot answer any election question, and send you to somewhere else. That self-regulation that these companies are doing, and I'm saying this is great. This is good that these companies are taking it upon themselves, but we should not stop there. We should not just, the companies often are self-regulated because that's a way of making sure that they won't be regulated from the outside. So just think, this is great, but we should not be kind of content with that. I just want to say one more quick thing, which is, I think we should all worry about AI. I think this sort of conversation are very important. This kind of event are very, very important. That being said, I think that we should also be wary that worrying only about AI as the newest technology, as the new thing, actually distract us with other things that are much more pressing about the election and our election. So I think that this conversation is important, this sort of research is important, but we should also realize that focusing our attention on just this new technology can take our eyes off the ball in some way. So I, for example, am much more worried the fact that Elon Musk is giving $1 million to anyone who's signing a petition. Worries me right now more than the use of AI. So I kind of want to, and it's something that I think we should think about when we think about technology. It's very important, but we should also be very cognizant about what this focus means that we're not looking at.
Thank you. Professor Wu, parting advice for students.
I guess I didn't pay attention to the video. I guess I was thinking, the whole discussion here is kind of about influence, right, and influencing decision making. And I guess like the more there's like content and kind of like branding and marketing surrounding us, it's including kind of what we're saying too, right? Like we're also trying to convince you of something. It's very difficult to distinguish external kind of like messages from your own original thought. And I think probably a healthy thing to do is to try to identify when you are being influenced and when are you being persuaded and why it's working, and being better at detecting it for yourself, right? And then giving yourself the space to think what is it that you think is right and important more than what other people assert. And if you practice that seems to me like a good safeguard.
Thank you. And I guess I'll take the pleasure of the last word. I think I really like what Professor Steingart said about technological determinism and the role that we all have to play from our various disciplines in tackling this question. And so we talked a lot about how at the end of the day, the people who build and use AI are people just like you. And so hopefully you come away from this a little bit more empowered to think about what is my role in tackling this problem at this or this opportunity at this given time. Thanks very much. All right, I think we're going to open the floor up to some Q&A. So if you want to raise your hand, then a mic can come by. And just try to keep the questions not super long-winded, just a little direct.
Hi, so thank you so much for this really interesting talk. I think it's really great that, of course, we've had academics from so many disciplines, and I think that's probably the only way to approach this problem in the future. One major theme that's definitely been there throughout this talk is the idea of guardrails, and as Professor Smith touched on briefly, I think as we move away from LLMs towards, a one which reasons on its own and agentic systems, and, for whoever was here for Mr. Lacan's talk last week, where he was talking about joint embedding models, we're kind of moving towards systems that reason themselves rather than just next token prediction. So how effective do you think baking responsibility into those reasoning models will be, and who should be responsible for that? Because as Professor Velez said, as an academic you have a certain approach and a certain set of principles that you're working with for that. A government, again, is a biased political entity. It's temporary. They, again, aren't the perfect governance organization. The private sector, OpenAI and Palantir approach responsibility completely differently. Within intergovernment organizations, those aren't binding. So who's actually the best person to be deciding what guardrails get baked into these models?
Yeah, and let me break that question into two parts. One for the computer scientist: do the models reason on their own, and then I'll follow up with the second half of the question.
I'll take a stab at the computer science answer. AI research is working on creating actual reasoning in AI systems, which is very different from the generative tools that we see today. Ultimately, though, right, even if we were to create systems that can reason better by themselves and actually understand some things, okay, now there's a system here that people could use or should use, but they also have the option to not use it. or to create their own system that doesn't have those reasoning guardrails. I think if we want to create real guardrails, like we have to have some kind of teeth to discourage that behavior aside from just technological capability. So that's my answer to that.
I'll go, because I think this is something, if you step back, right, you're implying that like the safeguards are all in the model, right? But if you think about like what a model is, it's just a decision maker. And so if you go to something like a nuclear reactor, they don't trust that the users will always be right? There are fundamental safeguards built into the system itself, right, into the nuclear reactor, so that even if everything fails, it'll shut down safely. And so, like if you think then about kind of like what it means for these models to be, fail-safe, I don't believe they will, right? You can work very, very hard, but they're certainly going to keep making mistakes. And so now it's a question of like, how do you design systems, right? For instance, digital systems, banking systems, software systems, database systems, so that even if they make mistakes, there are ways to then reconcile and kind of like, and guardrails to be put in place. So like my belief is like, that is where the interesting work lies, not necessarily in the models themselves.
Any final thoughts, or should we move on to? All right, let's move on to the next question.
You speak of safeguards, but how do you factor into the conversation political influencers such as Chris Kobach, who was once a Secretary of Kansas, who actually is heavily involved in the creation of voter restriction laws, and at one point in time also the use of Cambridge Analytica to also influence, right, people's perceptions as well as just the data itself. How do you take those into consideration when having these conversations about the benefits of AI?
I mean, I can try. I mean, I think that it's interesting. So the last question was like, I think it was phrased something to, who's the person? And I wanted to say it's us. It's all of us. We forget it. We are the public. We can have a say. I mean, I think we all have a say in how the systems. I mean, we now live in the feel. I think we all have the feeling that we don't have a say in how the systems are used and how they're operated, and the guardrails that one can come up with. But I'm not willing to give up that. I personally, as I'm not willing to give it up so easily. I think we should all have a say in that, and it's a way of kind of making sure that we as the public are informed, and we as the public have a right to have some kind of say in where these systems are used, where in the system, what sort of guardrails, what sort of system approach. I like that, this notion of a kind of a systematic approach for ensuring that the use of these models. I think that it's all on us as well, and we should just remember that we also have a say in that.
But it is true that governmental kind of like systems and institutions move at very, very slow timescales, and they are very slow to react, right? So whatever laws that end up being in place will be for yesterday's technology in some sense. And so, if you were to think, like what you're going to do, then you might think in terms of like adversarial, what's the worst way that you could use a technology, and try to anticipate for that, right? Like in kind of like the persuasion case, if you anticipate that this is going to happen, I don't know, do you just decide to, generate a bunch of fake content from the other side? I don't know what the right thing to do is, but I do worry about the timescales.
But would that, I mean, that should not stop you from.
You should protest. You should do everything else, right? Yeah, of course.
This idea
of course.
It's the technology, the
It's
technology
just
is changing. Yeah. Okay.
It's harder.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's harder.
And it sounds like some of the remedies will come from legal and political solutions. Some will come from the things that we build into these tools. So it seems like there are a lot of different ways to tackle that. Professor Velez, do you have any thoughts on nefarious actors?
Yeah.
Necessary, but not
So
sufficient.
there's a recent paper published in Science by a group of scholars at MIT, Ben Tappan and colleagues, I looked into micro-targeting, because I think micro-targeting it receives a lot of attention in the media. And they found that micro-targeted messages generally didn't do much better than a best message for a sample. So basically, if you can just construct a very persuasive argument, even if it doesn't take into account demographic characteristics, it can be just as powerful as a micro-targeted message. And I think that's, we should sometimes worry about the ways in which these tech companies present their capabilities and use them effectively to sell products, right? I worry about OpenAI and discussions about super persuasion. I think in some ways what that's doing is signaling to advertisers and marketing specialists that if you use our tool, you can be a super persuader. And I think if we actually turn to work in social psychology and political science, I think going back to my original point, persuasion is so difficult. And anybody who is promising that these tools are going to be hyper persuasive, I think we should be skeptical.
I just want to jump into this. I think it's such an important point what you're making, and doubly so in such a polarized society already, right? So with this notion that that within this kind of polarized society that we have, that targeting, that you are going to be able to really, so much of it is already baked in that it's not, that we shouldn't buy into the hype so much of the ability of this target persuasion.
Yeah, and I love how this harkens back to some things are new, but some things are not really new about this situation we find ourselves in. Let's move on to the next question.
Hi, I'm Andrea Galliano from the journalism school. I would like to ask something because we had the possibility to listen today about AI, democracy, and fear. Professor Steingart said that AI is not the first technology that creates fear. And connecting to that, or regarding that, it's about also the job market, like the job that AI is supposed to destroy, but vice versa, AI is also creating jobs. Last year, in March, the World Economic Forum said that the job of the future, the first job of the future, would have been prompt engineering. Now, no one is talking anymore about prompt engineering, and or otherwise it's a niche. It's not growing like so fast like other jobs in the AI industry. So I would like to know which will be a growing job, which will be, because prompt engineering turned to be a skill rather than a job itself, and AI is doing the job that prompt engineering should have done, AI itself, because it evolved. So I would like to know which is the job that will prevail in the AI sector.
Yep. So maybe we'll start with Professor Steingart, and then.
I only have that answer, which is that what job is going to prevail? The really low-paying job of being able to. You'll need people to actually mark the data that goes into, make sure that the data that goes into, this is truly what happened, is that this is why Amazon Mechanical Turk used to be artificial intelligence, which is because there are actually always people in the loop. It's just that those people are not, nobody sees the people who are actually labeling and making sure that the data is going. So, those are a low-pay job that.
And is there anything that history can sort of inform us on when new technologies arrive and they sort of shift the job market? It seems like it's also a time when power dynamics kind of change as well. Is there anything where history can sort of inform us on how to think about that?
Fears of technological unemployment were huge since the 1930s. There are already kind of fears of technological unemployment. We have fears of automations in the 50s and 60s as well. I think that this is, again, but I think you just need to realize that it's not that all jobs, I don't think that this notion of, I think that thinking that a lot of jobs are going to disappear, or this idea that we all, like this future when we all don't need to work because AIs will do all of it, I think what's more likely is going to happen is that there are going to be many more menial tasks, like labeling data, and it's going to just create a much more of a kind of break between the types of jobs. But,
I'm a little bit more optimistic about this.
Good.
I would characterize, so I guess like, a lot of banks, right, the major banks today are still running data systems built in the 60s and 70s, right? Before even SQL and modern databases existed. So legacy is a very, very powerful thing, right? Today, people cannot find COBOL programmers and other old kind of like programmers for systems for which like people still rely on today, right? For kind of like a lot of transactions and so on, but we don't train for, right? So you should never underestimate the power of legacy systems and kind of like what that entails, right? Legacy systems in terms of institutions as well as technology. The kind of jobs that certainly AI is very good for is knowledge work, right? So basically anything worth of the form consuming information, summarizing it, and making a decision, they will likely disappear in terms of like the nuts and bolts of it. But what will not disappear is the person that's accountable for the result or that's doing quality control, right? So you should think in terms of like what kinds of what kinds of manufacturing jobs have been automated away, and that is, I think, a good analogy for kind of like how things will go with these kind of informational tasks. But things like plumbing is always going to be required, right? Like things that require people to actuate and do things in the real world are always going to be required as well. And I would also argue that like if information content is free to generate, then it'll be more like art in a sense that bespoke kind of like creation of objects is going to be of value, right? But then that becomes a branding and marketing thing.
Yeah, and I think I will add that this is sort of, especially in the journalism school, there's some trepidation around what this is going to do to our career, our discipline. But I think there's a way to approach it with, what's this going to automate away? The sort of fear of that, or what can I do with all this free time I'm going to have, not doing all those menial tasks, right? I'm going to show up. I'm going to be in the community. I'm going to ask questions. Like, what are all the ways that we can sort of leverage the time freed up from not doing those laborious sort of menial tasks as well. Any final questions? Or any final responses to that question? Sorry. Okay. I think we are just about out of time. So thank you to all our panelists for those wonderful answers. And thank you all for coming tonight.